so many familiar faces here that I'm sure all of you by now know my views. So therefore, in a sense, I think maybe it's even superfluous for me to go into a long lecture. I think you perhaps are familiar with my point of view. Let me just put this here. The topic, religious legislation, no matter how we phrase it, and the attendant concept which it always involves, which is religious political parties, both of these subjects have to do with the general relationship between religion and state, church and state, dat and medina. But I think it would be a mistake to look at it in terms of this very general principle. Because to understand what we have before us, we have to be able to appreciate the fact that it's true that we are dealing here with the problem of the proper relationship between church and state, between religion and state. But we are talking about the Jewish state. And that makes it a very special kind of a case. And we are dealing here with religion, we're talking about the Jewish religion. So if it's the Jewish religion, and the relationship between that and a Jewish state, then already we have something completely different. And no amount of general ideas about what ought to be the relationship between church and state in general, none of that is going to help us. And none of it is going to be very enlightening, because we have to focus on something very historic, very special, very particular. And the reason why these two facts dictate the situation and mold the situation and present to us the peculiar problem that we have is the fact that the Jewish religion is not a religion that appeals primarily to the individual. It is, in its very unique character, a religion that makes demands upon the polity, upon the group, upon the nation. And therefore, you cannot say that the fact that there is a Jewish nation has nothing to do with religion, because religion is a private matter that has to do with the individual. Certainly in the West, by this time, this is how religion is conceived. It's a matter for the private conscience of every individual. And that politics should be involved, or that religion should be interested in politics. But long ago, the Christian religion said that you render unto Caesar what is Caesar's, and into religion what is religion, and the two have to be kept separate. This cannot be said in regard to Judaism, because Judaism demands, and almost in its first instance, demands the nation. It set out at the very beginning to create a nation. Amzu, Yotzarti li Kilosi Yisapeu. God says that I'm creating a nation. Sefer Shemot in the literature of Chazal is called Sefer Yetzirah, not Bereshit. Shemot is called Sefer Yetzirah because the creation and the formation that Chazal were interested in and they knew was very unique was not so much the world or the universe, it is the Jewish people. So if Judaism speaks to the Jewish people, it's definitely, without a question, going to be interested in politics. It's going to be interested in the state. It's going to be interested in the corporate entity which is known as the Jewish people or the Jewish state. On the other hand, if we look at the state that we're talking about in this equation or in this problem of religion and state, so the religion is the Jewish religion that makes demands on the state. And what is the state that we're talking about? We are talking about the Jewish state. And this is a fact. And it's not that I would like it to be a Jewish state, or you would like it to be a Jewish state. I'm talking now about phenomenon, about empirical facts. And the fact is that what has been created here, what has been formed and shaped here in 1948, whether you're from Mapai or Mapam or from Ratz or from whatever, what has been created here is a Jewish state. And the Declaration of Independence says so, and the Chok HaShvut says so, and this is what we have before us. Now, if we're talking about a Jewish state, so what is it to be Jewish? And here, I think again, it's a matter of historic fact that it is extremely difficult to try to separate anything Jewish from the Jewish religion. That is to say, it's hard to find something that we can call, or everybody will, this is Jewish, and yet it has nothing to do with Judaism as a religion. So because Jewishness is so inextricably involved with religion, and because of the fact that, for better or for worse, whether you like it or not, we have before us here a Jewish state, therefore the Jewish state, the very fact that it is a Jewish state, is going to lean towards or become involved in one way or another with religion. So what I'm saying is, from Beit Zayt, from the fact that we're talking about a special kind of religion, namely Yahadut, namely the Jewish religion, which leans towards, focuses upon, reaches out to the state. And we're talking about a Jewish state, which, whether the founders knew it or not, or liked it or not, ends up by being a Jewish state. And it's hard to think of anything Jewish without involving already religion. So from the other side also, there's a leaning towards religion. So that is why our problem is a special one and cannot be resolved by simply saying, I have a policy about mixing of religion and state, and I'm going to apply it here. It doesn't apply here. We have here something special. Now, the fact that we have here these two empirical situations that we start with, these two have resulted in their combination, by their interaction, they have resulted again in two phenomena. And I'm not yet talking philosophy, and I'm not yet talking about normative, what I would like to see, what ought to be. I'm talking about the situation as we have it before us. This has resulted in two fundamental facts. First of all, that we notice a continuing and increasing, and I would say partially successful, involvement by religion in politics here in Israel. From the very beginning, religion was involved, and oddly enough, I myself felt about a year ago that this trend was sort of slackening off, but not so. In the last national elections, we've witnessed a resurgence, an intensification, an increase by religious forces in politics or in the affairs of state. And here we have to understand again some very special kind of phenomenon. When I say that religion is involved in politics, I don't simply mean that there are religious Jews who form a political party and they're involved in politics. Like in Europe, you have sometimes the Christian Democrats. Here you have something very special. And that is, you have here at least 3 or 4 religious parties that were created that are religious, not merely in the sense that the people who form them are religious, or that the program or the platform of the party is a religious one. It is that they come out publicly and openly and say, we don't invent and we don't formulate our orders. We are in direct contact with our spiritual mentors, our religious teachers. They tell us what to do. They tell us how to vote. Now, what more direct involvement of religion can you have than that sort of I mean, before Kennedy was elected the president, it was clear to everybody, and he had to say this 1,000 times, and it had to be clear, that don't think because he's a Catholic he gets his orders from the Pope. I mean, Americans would never have elected Kennedy if they had even a little glimmer of idea that that's how it worked. Because you're a Catholic, you get your orders from the Pope. Here we have at least 3 important religious parties who have been elected on the basis, and they told this to Shamir, when Shamir wanted to know, okay, I'll make with you a coalition and you'll support the Likud. Now, can I count on your support when it'll come to different votes in the Knesset? So they said to him, no, we can't promise you our support. We have to go back and ask the Moetzi Gedolei HaTorah. We have to ask the Rabbi Shubert. We have to ask our spiritual mentors what they think. And until we get the answer from them, we can't promise you anything. No, as our coalition partner, you must understand, they were not very happy with that, and maybe that's one of the reasons, it certainly is one of the reasons why none of the deals that were made between the religious parties and the Likud turned out. So there has been this increasing involvement by religion in politics here. And on the other side, on the other hand, as a result of the interaction of these two forces, that we have a Jewish state and we have here a Judaism that's interested and involved in politics, we have here, and I give this out not as an achievement of any specific party or group of parties. This has practically been a givenness of this state, of this country that we live in. And that is that we have here from the very beginning what is commonly referred to as the status quo, the religious arrangement that we have here. And let me just remind you of what these four basic points are. First of all, that the official days of rest in this country are the Shabbat and the Chagim. Secondly, that dietary laws will be observed in all of the public institutions. Third, that marriage and divorce will be in the hands of the rabbinical courts, the rabbis. And this involves a whole network of rabbinical courts. And this also involves arrangements with the Ministry of Religion, who helps to organize religious councils in every city, and they provide for synagogues and mikvaot. In other words, all of the religious services that religious Jews need are taken care of by the state. And finally, the question of religious education. There was, before the formation of the state, different zamim, different political parties had different systems of education, and it was resolved that with the beginning of the state, there would be a merger. These would come under the aegis of the state. The state would pay for all the expenses and be involved and so on. And what emerged from that was that there was, after a bit of history, there emerged two systems. One, the Mamlachti system, the state public school, if you want to call it education, secular, so-called, and the other was religious education. Actually, it was the Mamlachti Dati, the Mizrahi schools, and that, of course, included also Chabad originally went into that system, and Poali Agudish Israel went into it as well. Now, here we have four basic, I would say, there was no constitution. We never had, and we still don't have a written constitution. But here is part of what I call the Chukei Yisod or Kavei HaYisod. These are the fundamental laws which govern the relationship between the state and religion in this country of ours. And I would say that they're pretty good things. They're pretty good achievements. And to a large extent, this is, I think, what for many of us makes the difference between living in Borough Park, in Brooklyn, or living in Yerushalayim, or in the Jewish state in this country. Now, many groups, as I said, like to believe that this was a great accomplishment of some particular religious party. And every time you discuss what did the religious parties ever accomplish, they point to this. You see, look at these four things. I have a thesis, I can't prove it, but it is my conviction that these things came about, and they came about at the beginning. They came about even before the state was even declared. It came about as a letter, by Ben Gurion to actually, I think it started with a letter to the Agudish Yisrael, to Shemei Levin, that this is what the state would assure all of its religious citizens. And I think it was motivated not simply because then Ben Gurion needed the support of the religious parties for any narrow particular coalition that he wanted to make. He wanted the support of the religious parties, but not just the religious parties. He wanted the support of religious Jewry, not only in Israel, but all over the world. Why? Because Ben Gurion knew, with all of his feelings about religion, whatever they were, he knew that if he's going to found a Jewish state here in Eretz Yisrael, it has to have upon him of a Jewish state. It has to have some kind of linkage, some kind of connection, some kind of character or physiognomy that would identify it with Judaism, with the Jewish tradition. And therefore, he felt that this is something that the state ought to do. It wasn't to please any particular party. It was to please tradition. It was to please his sense of what the unity of the Jewish people required. So I don't think it can be called anybody's achievement. And if you look very hard at it, you'll see that it wasn't such a big sacrifice on the part of Ben-Gurion, or on the part of the secular people in Israel at that time to agree, or even at this time to go along. Let me just make a few remarks about each one. Shabbos and Chagim are the official day of rest. There has to be some day of rest. Right? You're founding a new country. There has to be one day of rest. So which should it be? Sunday? Friday? In other words, it wasn't a big deal. He had a problem, Ben-Gurion. He has to make one day a day of rest. No, it's was it on the Shabbat? So it's Shabbos. So it's and most of the Chagim, it's not that he was doffing his hat to religion, to the Charedim. One of the most of our Yom Tovim are inspirations for about the Jewish people. They celebrate historic occasions on the part of Am Yisrael. And Ben-Gurion knew too that his citizens, secular or religious, have to have an education in Jewish history and in the formative events of our people. So it wasn't a big concession on his part. Dietary laws. And if you wouldn't have dietary laws in the army, so what? He'd have to have a special, either he'd have to exempt all religious people, or special plugot, special. That certainly doesn't make too much sense. It would be discriminatory. And again, I don't think that he was giving a great concession there. Marriage and divorce laws, that the rabbi should handle it. Actually, this was an idea of the Ottoman Empire. In the days of the Turks, before even the British got here, the arrangement was that when it came to marriage and divorce, each religious community took care of handled its affairs. So the Muslims had theirs, and the Christians had theirs, and if there were Jews here, so the Jews handled their thing, that's what they did. All that Ben-Gurion did was to continue a situation that had existed until then. And why was it with the Orthodox rabbis? Because there weren't any other rabbis around at the time. It was the Orthodox rabbis who had this koyach until then, and it would continue. So again, no big innovation at the time. And the religious educational system as well, of course, in a sense, that was partly a failure on our part, on the part of religious Jews. Mizrahi the whole time had wanted to be in control of all the education in Israel, because we knew the importance of being able to raise and educate Jewish people here in this country, that they should know something about Torah and about Yiddishkeit. The fact that this was not given to Mizrahi was, of course, a great disappointment, but at least it took over the religious system and made it part of the government system. Now, there's one other little bit of legislation here, if you want to call it. So this is the basic religious legislation that we're talking about, that exists. If you want, you can say there's another religious bit of legislation that we've been talking about a lot, and we hear about a lot lately, and that is the law of the return, the Chok HaShvut, which says that any Jew who comes, who wants to, is immediately upon coming to Eretz Yisrael a citizen of this country. Now, we had a whole problem and a whole to-do about, well, it should define and spell out who is a Jew, and a Jew should be according to the halakha. Now, we have to understand, first of all, that this is not religious legislation. This is the basic Zionist principle on which all branches of Zionism were founded. Namely, again, I said before, this is a Jewish state, and everyone agreed it. How do you show that it's a Jewish state? By saying it's open to all Jews. And immediately, as soon as they come here, they can be citizens. So this is not religious legislation. This is good, hardcore Zionist legislation. There's one sorah. It mentions Jew. If you mention Jew in the law, or any term in the law, you should have some definition of who and what is a Jew. And therefore, this was the beginning of the problem. And here we have to chalk up a great accomplishment to the Mizrahi, that over the years they fought for the change. Originally, it did not say that a Jew is one either who from a Jewish mother or who converted. Originally, it did not say that. It was left very vague, very open. And after repeated negotiations and fighting, they got through this definition, which exists now, which is a religious definition. Definition says who is a Jew, someone born of a Jewish mother, or converted. Now, converting itself is a religious term. The Mapam knows nothing about conversions. Ratz doesn't go near the question of conversions. Conversions is a religious term. So, if you just leave it alone, it would Mamela have to be kahalacha. And if you put in the word halacha, that wouldn't change it either, because if there are some people who want to say that theirs is a halacha too, if the reform is a halacha and conservative is a halacha, then they can argue that as well, even if you had the word halacha. So this whole thing was a tempest in a teapot. Nobody that I have met responsible feels that this was a very important issue. Why it caused such a rumpus and why it was even pushed through so many times, I don't know. But in any case, I want you to understand that the way it stands now, the Chok HaShvut, which is one of the basic laws of the state of Israel, is not religious legislation, but it is legislation which gives a religious definition to a basic term such as who is a Jew. And that's an important plus, as I see it, for the legal foundations of the state. Now, what are the demands of religious Jews on the polity? I said before that Judaism as a religion isn't just interested in the individual, the prat, the yachid. We're interested in the polity, in the state. What do we want from the state? What are the goals of religious Jews as far as this country is concerned? I would say, first of all, there is the desire on the part of all religious Jews that the character of the state, the corporate character of the state, should be as Jewish as possible. And by that I mean should be as much as possible in accordance with Jewish values, with Jewish halacha, with Jewish ideals. Now there's a difference here between a religious Zionist and a Haredi on this point. A religious Zionist feels that, why do I want the state of Israel to look Jewish? What do I mean by look Jewish? I would like that El Al should not run on Shabbos. I don't have to go in El Al. I don't go travel on Shabbos, but I would like that if El Al is the Israel, what the TWA does is not my geschäft. But El Al, I would like to see that it not run on the Shabbat. Why? Because it's the airline of Israel. I would like to see all embassies that fly the Israeli flag should be kasher, etc., etc. This is what I mean by the corporate. I would like to see Shabbat observed in the street and so on. Now, why are religious Zionists interested in this? Because we feel that the state itself has religious significance. We, in our tefillot, call this the Reishit Tzmichat Gulotenu. This is the beginning of the sprouting of our redemption. Ashena redemption it is if it wouldn't have a Yiddish upon it. So as much as possible, we strive and fight, would like to see the corporate character. Now it's not that we want to prevent individual Jews. We are all sophisticated enough to know that neither God nor we get any special credit or are not going to accomplish anything if we, through coercion, force other Jews to be religious. There's no value in forcing another Jew to be religious. So that's not why we would like to see the state or buses not to run on the Shabbat. We want buses not to run on the Shabbat, not to inconvenience Machalei Shabbat, but simply to give a spirit of the Shabbat to the streets and avenues and roads of Eretz Yisrael. Why does the Haredi also fight for some of this? He's not interested in the state as a state. He long ago decided this is not Reishit Tzmichat Gulotenu. But why is he interested? He has another problem. He feels that he has an obligation to prevent sacrilege to things that are holy. If Yerushalayim is holy, he's not going to go to bat the Haifa. But if Yerushalayim is Ir HaKodesh, and if up until now the movies have not been opened, and on the Shabbat, he will fight that it should continue that way. He will fight that El Al should not run on Shabbat. Not because it's the airline of Israel, but he would like to be able to patronize. If El Al runs on the Shabbat, he feels no obligation. Lahefach, he feels that he'll fight it by not traveling on El Al. he doesn't want his things that are holy to be made sacrilegious. For example, that's why he wants to pass a law about archaeology. If he has a suspicion that archaeologists are violating the graves of Jewish ancestors, he feels he's got to protest. He can't permit that because that is holy. He may be wrong about his facts, but at least this is what upsets him, and that's what gets him going. If you'll try to bring women into the kotel without a proper mechitza, there'll be a riot. Why? Because that's holy ground, and he has not come down to Israel to see things that are holy should be violated. So, but both the religious Zionists and the non-Zionists, the Haredi, all have a kind of reach out into the public arena where they would like to fight for their religious ideals. Now, so that's the religious character of the state. A second goal that we all have is that we feel religious Jews ought not to be discriminated against in this Jewish country, in this Jewish land. In other words, it should be as easy to live here as a Jew, at least as easy as it is to live in Borough Park. Now, what do we mean by that? We mean that there should be a shul, there should be a mikveh, there should be kosher restaurants. We mean that an autopsy, if we can beat an autopsy being done in Kings County in Brooklyn, then why should we have a problem when it comes to Jewish doctors here in the state of Israel? If this is holy to a religious Jew? So that we insist upon. For example, if Chas v'Shalom the Shabbat wasn't the religious day of rest, then it would mean, and people worked on Shabbos, that would mean that a Sabbath observer would be discriminated. He couldn't get a job because he wouldn't work on Shabbos. Let's say if everybody else worked on Shabbos in this country. So that would be discriminatory, and it would be hard to live as a religious Jew here. And therefore that is something that we would insist upon. Or for example, if we feel it's wrong, or if some people feel it's wrong, to draft women into the army, there has to be a way in this country that women ought not to be drafted. And this has nothing to do with other desires of ours for religious legislation. This has to do with simply the right of religious Jews to be able to live in this country as in as easy a manner as it is elsewhere. Now, a third goal that we have is that since Israel is a welfare state, and here Jews have learned a few things in the last few years. I mean, for example, if again I keep talking about New York or Brooklyn because I'm familiar with the situation, the United States today is also to a certain extent a welfare state. So if you live as a religious Jew, let's say in Brooklyn, here are the things that you can get for religious Jews from government. That is to say, either federal government or state government or city government. You can get, if you've got a little store and you want to open up, change your storefront, you can get a small business loan at a very easy interest. You have a yeshiva and you have a lot of kids eating lunch, there's a free lunch program. You have a lot of people who aren't making enough money, they can get food stamps. They have big families, they can get food stamps. There's a senior citizens program. You can build, like Agudas Yisrael builds buildings with federal grants in order to make it possible for senior citizens to have places where to live. All this is in the United States, where there's a welfare state. Now, there are some people here who feel that if this is a welfare state, that at least religious Jews ought also to be able to be receiving all of these goodies and all of these things from the government. And therefore they argue that there should be, for example, stipends for families that have large, with many children. There should be scholarships for foreign students who come to study in yeshivas. Why shouldn't the amount of help that a yeshiva student gets be as much as what a university student gets from the state? Of course, there's a little bit of a problem here. If the yeshivas would commit themselves to be drafted and serve the army, maybe that would make more sense. But in any case, at least is a talking point. So that one of the things, the third thing that religious Jews are looking to the state of Israel for, one of their goals they'd like to achieve, is to be able to receive for their institutions and for their schools and for all of their corporate institutions, they should receive help, material help from the government, at least as much as other institutions are receiving. Now, how do we go about achieving these goals? Now, until now, the answer has been, if you want all these things from the government, from the state, from the polity, then you have to be involved in the political process. And what is the political process? You have to have political parties, and you try to pass laws. At least it's one of the ways. Try to pass laws in order to have all these things done. This is a democracy. Israel is a parliamentary democracy. The political process involves political parties, and this is how you go about it. And as I say, that's why, from the very beginning, given the thrust of Judaism to want to be involved in the polity, in the character of the state, therefore political parties have existed and they are increasing. But of course you have to understand that in order to pass legislation in a democracy, you have to have a majority that are with you, that are going to agree with you and approve and pass. Now, what are the chances of all the religious people of this country getting together and having a majority to pass, let's say, new legislation? All these things that I said before, the status quo, these 4 major points, those things were passed originally because the Mapai wanted to pass it. The major parties, the great majority of people living here at that time, led by Ben-Gurion, said, yes, we want to pass this, so therefore there was a majority to pass all of these things. Now, if you want to pass any new legislation, you have to have a majority. What are our chances of getting now, considering what has happened in the last 40 years, what are our chances of organizing a majority here in this country? Now, the truth is that altogether, all the religious parties, that is to say, our voting strength, and this has remained constant from in the last 40 years, from the very beginning, from 1948 until the present, including the so-called upsurge of what we had in the last national elections. We are 15% of the voting electorate, 15% of the Knesset. That's where we are. And the fact that we have now 18 seats, religious seats in the Knesset, the truth is we had once already 18 seats. Distributed differently, but we had already once 18 seats. I think it was in 60-something we had 18 seats. So this has not changed. We haven't become more powerful over the years, in spite of the fact that Newsweek and Time magazines are panicking and everybody's worried and the Haredim are taking over. The fact is we haven't gained in political strength. So with 15%, how can we hope to have a majority? The truth is this. Over the last 40 years, the status quo was established, as I told you, in the beginning. We have tried to improve. Take the Shabbat, the law of the Shabbat, that is a rest day. It was a patchy thing to begin with. It was left up to the municipalities. That's why in Haifa the buses do run, in Yerushalayim they don't run. The whole thing was a mess from the very beginning. So over the years, the Mizrahi tried very much, at a time when they were in the government, at a time when they were sitting pretty in terms of coalition. They tried very much to improve it. They didn't. They failed. Mihu Yehudi question. We also tried to change that. It wasn't the Lubavitcher Rebbe who had the first idea to make it kahalacha, to add the word kahalacha. This was part of the Mizrahi platform for years to try to get that through. They failed. They failed. They threatened, we're going to leave the government. They said, leave the government. They left the government. So then Syria attacked, and they said, oh, there's a big national problem. They can run you back again. It's very unclear. If you try to follow the history of the ins and outs of the Mizrahi into the government on the basis of the Mihu Yehudi, it's very hard to follow. The end result was, it failed. It failed. What I'm trying to say is that by using religious legislation, by trying to pass new laws, in order to achieve our goals here in this country, after the original great achievement, which as I say was not due to the religious parties, after the first great achievement of the status quo, there has been very little new things that have been achieved. Now, the answer really is, though, that you don't need a majority. You don't need a majority. With the 15%, you can wheel and deal and maybe achieve a few good things. And how can you do that? And this is the well-known coalition maneuvering that we speak about. In other words, it just so happens, God help, that in order to form a government in this country, you need a majority. You need more than 60 seats in the Knesset. And God helped that even in the good days, Labour wasn't able to make a government on their own. They had to have partners. So to have a partner, they could have gone to Mapam, they could have gone here, they could have gone there. But they found that the Mavdal, the Mizrahi, and they were the only large religious body for a long time, they were the good partner, the best partner for the Labour Party. And until 1977, from 48 on, what we call the historic relationship between Labour and Mizrahi, or Mavdal, continued. And I want to read to you what Professor Isaacs calls, what was this historic relationship between, or the arrangement between Labour and Mavdal. This is what he says, and I quote, Mavdal gives Labour a free hand in economic and foreign policy in return for concessions in the religious sphere. You hear the chachma? Why were we such a good partner? Why did Labour love us and prefer us to any other party that was around? We were very nice and docile. Mavdal came along and said, look, we have a certain agenda. We're a religious political party. What is your agenda? We want the religious, give us the religious ministry. First of all, we got to safeguard the rabbis with the courts and so on. Secondly, we're interested in education. We want to safeguard the mamlechti dati system. You give us this, and you give money to the yeshivas, resolve these other things, and a good budget, you can do whatever you want with the foreign policy, and we'll support you in whatever you do on the economic policy. Was that good or bad, my friends? I'll tell you, it wasn't so bad as it sounds in those days. Why? Because there were no great issues in foreign policy and economics. First of all, economics, Labour Party is a socialist. They're socialist. And socialism, with its concept and ideals of justice for the working man, that's not very far from Yiddishkeit. So there's nothing wrong with it. And besides, Mizrahi itself had a Polar Mizrahi movement. We also had laborists, and we thought of the work ethic, and it was very close to our hearts. And as far as foreign policy was concerned, I mean, they had the kibbutzim, they had the army, they fought and everything. So, and there were no big issues then. It was to defend the state. They were the wonderful defenders of the state. So it made a lot of good sense from both Seiten that there was this historic relationship between Labour and Mavdal. And that's how it went. Now, but here's the point that's very interesting. Even in those good years, we didn't achieve what I was talking about before, the attempts to improve on the Shabbat, the attempts to work through Mihu Yehudi was not in the good years. And Mizrahi still couldn't achieve anything, even when they were dealing only with Labour. Now, what happened after the Likud victory in 1977? And after, this was of course after the Six-Day War. What happened was that this situation became complicated. In other words, what are we talking about again? We're talking about the possibility of working the political process of Israel. That is to say, achieving our goals, even though we're only 15%, even though we only have a few, we have the tops 18 seats in the Knesset. How could you do it? You can do it by wheeling and dealing. How? By joining up with one of the big major blocs and saying, look, we'll support you, you support us. We tried it with Labour until 77. What happened after the Likud victory was this. First of all, until 77, there was only one game in town. The only game in town was with Labour. And that isn't so good when you're trying to sell something and there's only one koine. So who are you going to sell to? You only have no choice. Now there were two people that were interested in the support of the religious bodies. Likud and Labour. But what complicated it was that while it would appear that we would now have a choice, in other words, we can say, we'll go to the highest bidder. Whoever will give us more in terms of our religious program, we will support them. That wasn't so possible anymore. Why? After 67, there were national issues And Mafdal could no longer say, we'll give you a free hand in national issues and just give us our religious programs. Why couldn't we say that? Because after the Six-Day War, you had a problem of Eretz Yisrael Hashleima. After the Six-Day War, you had a problem of war and peace. After the Six-Day War, there was a whole issue of what should be the national policy of the State of Israel. And here, religious Jews did feel that it made a difference if I go with Marach. I can't say I'll go to the person who's the highest bidder. If Marach is willing to give up territories, how could a religious Jew say, I'm willing to forego religious parts of Eretz Yisrael if you'll give me my religious program? Although we'll see that this is precisely what the Haredi parties did in the last election. In any case, it appeared, at least for a while after the Six-Day War, that the Likud was the natural trading partner of the Mafdal. And if so, Mafdal couldn't sell itself to any other party because it just didn't make sense to go together with Marach, at least in those years. Now, what I wish to conclude from this is that new religious legislation, either to try to get it through a majority, which is hopeless, or to try to work it through by hoping for some new coalition. And we have seen what happened in the last election. And I think that gave the coup de grace to the idea of coalition politics. That in spite of all the wheeling and dealing, none of the religious parties got what they really wanted. They got something, and we'll talk about that, but they didn't get what they really wanted. Mafdal did not get the religious ministry. I'm sorry, did not get the education ministry, which is so vital to them. Aguda did not get the passage of Mihu Yehudi, which they said without that it's a camel melting, and they're all in the government. So from this we see that even by coalition maneuverings, you cannot get what you want in terms of the political process. Now, here let me say this. Is it such a tragedy if it seems that we cannot pass any more new religious legislation? I would like to submit to you, and this I think will come out later more sharply, that for a long time there have been people who felt that lo zu haderech. It is not the way, if you want to increase and magnify and inspire people with Yadut, with our Jewish religion, the way to do it is not through the political process. The way to do it is not through legislation, which is coercive. In other words, in brief, let me just say to you why people feel that way. First of all, because they feel that if we're talking about Avodat Hashem, if we're talking about religious observance, we all know that has to be voluntary. If not, it has very little value. We say in our davening, Umal Chuto Baratzon Kiblu Aleichem. The Jewish people accepted God's kingdom Baratzon, through willingly, on a voluntary basis. If it's coerced, it has little religious value. So the idea of passing laws to get people, I told you at the beginning, nobody really thought of that's the way to do it, or that's the purpose of it. But if some people feel that, and are afraid of religious Jews, because they feel that religious Jews want to coerce them into being religious, that's furthest from our minds, not because we are too able to do it that way. God doesn't want it that way. Secondly, what's bad about religious politicians is that in the political process you have to negotiate. The whole idea of politics, people said, politics is the art of the possible. You have to negotiate. If you negotiate, you have to compromise. And people feel like this. If labor and management go into a conference and they're negotiating on a kind of a new wage scale, so you make a compromise. The workers back off a little, management gives a little, and you work out a compromise. That's good. What is if these are two politicians who are together and they're trying to negotiate on the Shabbat? I represent Mafdal and I say, I don't want buses running on the Shabbat. And they say, no, we want buses to run on the Shabbat. We argue for a long time and then we say, okay, let's have a compromise. You know what? In Jerusalem they'll run. In Haifa they'll run, in Jerusalem not. Now, that don't make too much sense here. Because when people come out, when that person comes outside from the conference room, and he tells his congregants, his party people, hey, you know what? I only got half a deal. What's the half a deal? They're going to run. They're going to run in Haifa. In other words, you agreed that the buses should run on Haifa. You, a religious politician, agreed that the buses should run on Haifa. You compromised with the Shabbat. What's the happening of this? I mean, I think all of us can see that this is not appropriate. It's not the kind of wheeling and dealing which one expects if what is involved are religious principles. Lord, it's better to stand on you. If I don't have any power, I say, look, I would like this to be. You do whatever you want. But if I enter into a negotiation and I'm representing, and then I have to come out and initial the agreement, what does it mean? Mafdal agrees to whatever it is, the compromise. Now, from a political point of view, maybe okay, maybe this is all you can get. But that's fine. I'd be happy with it. But what I'm not happy with is that it has to be initialed by a religious person, as if he agrees to it. This is what a lot of people find very bad. But the most important point of all this, why people are not happy with religious legislation, is because, win or lose, it creates resentment for Yiddishkeit and for Kodesh Baruch. Our supreme and ultimate goal as religious Jews is to see to it that God and His Torah should become beloved by all people. And if we're involved in activities where at the end of it is, all we cause is resentment, hostility, hatred. Why? Because people say, you're trying to impose on me this, you're trying to do this, you're trying to do that. And there's a paka. People are afraid of religious Jews and Haredim. The question is, what did we accomplish with such activities? Now here I say win or lose. If you win and it goes through, then I certainly say, let's say if we won through Miyu Yehudi, the reform, the conservative, what they would have done. So thank God, I didn't say that, thank God, whatever it is, we lost, we didn't win. So we lost. We still get it, but because we tried so hard, so because of our intention. So it'll take a long time for them to make up. Win or lose, you cause resentment. And therefore, for these three basic reasons, there are people who say that it's wrong to begin with. I try to show you how it's a myth and it's impossible and we'll never achieve any more new legislation. But there are people who say it was misguided and a mekach tov from the beginning. It was a mistake from the very beginning. Why? Because it goes against, it's counterproductive. It produces the opposite of what religious Jews ought to really want to accomplish. Now, there's one other way in which religious parties try to achieve some of their goals, and that is not by religious legislation, not by passing any laws, but simply by gaining control of certain ministries. And this is something that has become a very, very interesting and very attractive. And actually, this is why. See, the Mafdal, originally we used to think of a religious party was the Mafdal. But once the Mafdal showed the way, now everybody's getting into the act, and everybody's making a religious party. Why? Because they see that there's an awful lot to be gained by simply being in charge of the ministry. Now, I don't think it's such a very nice or effective way to run a government, but it so happens that here in Israel, it's rather decentralized. So if you're in the Ministry of Defense, you carry on your war with against the Intifada. You report occasionally if people don't like what you're doing, so you got enough friends in the cabinet to put them down, to squash them down. Anyway, it's pretty much your little area, it's your private people, your domain. If you're the ministry of, and so goes with every ministry. Now, Mafdal learned a long time ago, and this is why to them this was exceedingly important, that the religious ministry, where they felt they had their interests, that they had to have, and that most of the time, not all the time, most of the time, they were able to achieve. So even if they couldn't pass new laws, at least they said, look, we'll support you, and it was always worth whatever votes the Mafdal had. If it was outside by 12, and even less, it was worth it to the large party. Give them the ministry. They weren't too interested in religion anyway, and so on. Education ministry, fine. But then Shas discovered something very interesting. Even if you have the Ministry of Interior, there's an awful lot you can do for religious institutions. Big budget. Shas was able to develop a whole network of kindergartens and pre-kindergartens and helping all kinds of people through the Ministry of Interior. So now, if you notice, what were the demands? This new Haredi party said, they'll take anything. Why? They'll find a way to help religion regardless of what the party is. So for example, now, I think, by the way, I don't want to be cynical, I think they'll do a good job, at least better than anybody else did before. And that is Yitzchak Peretz from Shas is now the head of the absorption ministry. Now, that's okay. I'm sure he wants to bring in a lot of Olim. But so you say, well, what does that got to do with religion? Soon you will hear about very attractive scholarships that are offered for any people who want to come from America or from any part of the world to study in yeshivas. There's a budget for that. Misrad HaKlita. That'll help yeshivas. Do you know what Agudas Yisrael asked for during the last coalition elections, the negotiations? They said, we'll take the lottery. We'll be in charge of the lottery. What, lottery? I'm sure there are religious Jews who won't even gamble. Nah, but the money goes for education, the money goes for, never mind, lottery is also there. So, there were all kinds of things that people saw ways in which to help. But here too, you see, it's something which is of a short-term endurance, because we saw again during the last elections that the parties weren't able to get what they wanted to get. All right, so they got the ministry here. Institutions will get money. Yeshivas will probably get more money than they ever got before. But is that what religious Zionism is all about? In other words, the big picture. See, Mafdal had a big picture. Mafdal, as a religious Zionist party, had the view of what do we want to do? Why are we going into politics? Because we have something to say about this. It's not that we want money for our institutions. Okay, they did that too. There's no question. But basically it was to see, can we mold and influence the state, which we identify with. It wasn't just a question of milking. How much milk can I get out of this cow? But this is the way these other religious parties are looking at it. So, and the truth is that's why they failed so miserably while they were very successful in the elections. And they got seats and parties and they got members of the Knesset. When it came to the coalition maneuverings, they lost out. And some people say, oh boy, Shamir is a chacham, he really gave it to them. But if you read the columnists, what they say, why this happened, there was a tremendous chalasha that came about as a result of all this. And why? First of all, we find out that there was no unity among the religious parties, which as we know. In fact, that's one of the bitter things about it. Do you know why so many people came out to vote in the last national elections? Why did Agudas Yisrael get so many votes? Why did Degel Torah get so many votes? Because there was such a bitter machloket, there was such a bitter controversy. There's nothing like a good machlokes to get people to come out and vote. What you have here is what we call the stabilization of political parties. What do I stabilization of political parties? It's not a political party. I'm voting for here because Azoy my Rebbe Gehasen. It's like shul. It's like when you're voting in a shul, in shul politics. This is my party, my group. I gotta see a nitzachim. I want to see a victory for my group, for my party, for my Rebbe. And like great machlokes in between Hasidic Rebbeim always brought out the crowds and the fervor and the passion. Like that here too, brought out all of the election. But okay, so that you can say is Kira Sofrim Tav Chachma. So the competition brought out the vote. Is good. But in the maneuverings, what happened was Shamir saw that he couldn't satisfy all the parties at the same time. What this one wanted, this one was against. Do you know what Degel Torah had the chutzpah to ask for? They said that just like in the Ministry of Education, there is a special man who is responsible for the Mamlachti Dati schools. He's in charge. We want now somebody in the Ministry of Education with a salary, with a budget, to be in charge of the Haredi schools. Now, anyone who's familiar with the history of Agudas Yisrael knows that for decades, Agudas Yisrael refused to permit Chinuch Atzmoi to come under the rubric of the Ministry of Education because they said, you'll be with us. You'll be influencing us. We'll lose our independence. We can't be under the Ministry of Education. Suddenly, what was possible and also for decades became kosher and in fact, desirable. So, they wanted also someone in charge. Then, so the Shas said, if there'll be someone for the Ashkenazic Haredi schools, we want somebody in charge of the Sephardic Haredi schools, a special man. So Mizrahi said, you'll give them that, then we're out. Now, they couldn't satisfy both, you see. What this one wanted, this one was opposed. So the lack of unity among the religious bodies created a situation where it had to fail. And do you know what the lesson that, if you read the Haredi press, you know what the lesson that they learned from the national elections was? The more divided you are, the better it is. And that's why in the municipal elections, there are a few places where there's a united front, a religious front. But most of the municipalities, again, it's all broken up, and every party is trying to go it alone. Why? They look upon the whole political process as simply a way, how can I get more material funds for my institutions, and I don't want it to be divided by, I don't trust the Agudas Yisrael to make the division. So what if there would be united, all the religious parties together, and one big gadol will make the distribution. They won't trust each other. Ad kedei kach, there's no unity. Now that's a chilul Hashem. That's a chilul Hashem. The end result was, my friends, that at the beginning, if you remember, after the elections, there was panic, and people said, oh, there was an upsurge of the Haredim, they're going to take over everything. And after that, it turned into a galechta. So from being having the image of a monster that's going to, control everybody, we suddenly became a laughing stock. And both of those images is not good for us, and both of those images was a chilul Hashem. Now, I want to conclude by simply asking a few questions, because I think that the events of these last few years have made these questions very, very vital. Particularly after the last elections, I think there's more reason than ever before to question the place of religion in politics. That is to say, the need for our being involved religiously in political parties in Israel. That is to say, to have religious political parties. I wrote this once in an article not too long ago, and I was attacked in the press as saying that I don't know really what I'm talking about, because we need religious political parties. Even if we don't get one new religious law passed, we need religious political parties to protect and to preserve what we already have. This is an argument that I hear constantly. And I say that I have to question this very much. I question this very much because, again, I don't think what we achieved was achieved through political parties. We achieved it, I think, because there was a consensus. There was a consensus then, and there is still now, by the people of Israel. Let Shabbos be the official day of rest. Let the rabbis be in charge. There are problems. In other words, I don't think that there's a majority of people in Israel that want to overturn the status quo, and therefore I see there's no special need to want to defend this or to preserve it. I don't think it's endangered, in spite of a lot of people trying to tell us that it is. And also, our chief goal here in Israel is to see to it that orthodoxy, traditional Judaism as we know it, should become more and more beloved by the people of Israel, all the people of Israel. And everything we do in politics always turns out to give us a black eye and a bad image. And therefore, we have to consider that. Even if there should be a slight gain that you're gaining, you're getting more money for this one, and more money doing for that. Put that up against the debit side. Put that up against the Chil Hashem that you're creating. Put it up against all the resentment you're creating. And on balance, I say, who needs it? But then there's another reason. As religious Jews, and I say dafka as religious Jews, what should our focus be today? We are in the midst of an intifada that has been happening, that's going on now for more than a year. And I say that religious Jews have more to lose in an intifada than anybody else in this country. Because where are our sons and daughters? Not in the safety of these and Goch. A lot of our sons and daughters are dafke in the shtachim. And have to go through a kalkilia in order to go home and to go to work every day. And who was the woman with the 3 children that was burned to death, if not a religious person? And who was the soldier that was knifed to death on his way to the Kotel just a few days ago? A religious young man. The intifada is taking place in the territories and in East Jerusalem. Most of the people in this country don't have to go through East Jerusalem. We have to go through. Why? We want to get to the Kotel. We didn't come here to this country to be told that it's unsafe to go to the Kotel. That's what we should be fighting for. Not worrying whether Yeshiva X or Yeshiva Y is getting more money or less money. But we're not. And our political parties are not. I don't see our political parties in the forefront of asking questions about the intifada. They're concerned with their problems. So if we are having this, we are now facing a problem of peace or war. Do we give up shtachim for shalom or not? This is what should be exercising our minds. Here's where our political leaders ought to be thinking and working and discussing. Are we? We're thinking of our little problems. I mean, are the religious problems in this country important to me, or these bigger problems important to me? I must tell you, as a religious Jew and as a rabbi, I am more concerned about the intifada, and I am more concerned about the PLO than I am about any other religious problem in this country right now. So why should I siphon myself off and worry about the petty politics of some religious party? Who's going to be this or who's going to be that? I'm worried about these other problems. The economical situation here bothers me. I wish we would put our wisdom and our experience to try to solve some of the economic problems of this country. That's what's important. Our children won't stay here, my friends, if they can't make a living. Whether buses run on Shabbos or they don't run on Shabbos. That's the important question. Why aren't we thinking about that? Do I give a hoot? So what am I concerned about? Should they go Torah go in or the Lav Rebbe go in? Nonsense. Pure, unadulterated nonsense. That's what all this is about. So, my final word, my friends, is this. I'm simply suggesting that maybe religious political parties have seen their best days. Maybe they are counterproductive. I think and not only that, it's not wise for us to put all our investment in a leaky vessel. They haven't produced. I mean, I was told that the reason why you need to have political parties religious political parties is because they have to preserve the gains that we have had. One of the big gains is religious education. So with all of the big victory that Mafdal had in the elections, are they in charge of the Ministry of Education? No. Is Adani a guy, the head of, now Navon wants to fire Adani, who's in charge of the Mizrahi system. They're powerless to do anything about it. So what have we accomplished? We have already a religious political party. It is in the government. And they weren't able to get that which they say is the whole reason why you have a religious political party in the first place. They weren't able to get the Ministry of Religion. So what's the good of it? We have to find other solutions to our problems. I don't think they can achieve what we want them to do. So you'll say, what's the alternative? And I just want to throw this out as a suggestion. I think the alternative ought to be explored. I'm not saying that you should dissolve religious political parties, because they won't be dissolved. And there are too many Benkelach involved, so forget about it. They'll be here for a long time to come. I'm just saying that we ought to be thinking about alternatives. And the alternative is we have to fight for religion outside of the political framework. The truth is, Yiddishkeit in this country is strong, it is growing, it is wonderful. All the Zramim are doing fine and wonderful. And if we won't get that much money from in America, we saw that we didn't, times when we didn't get money from the government, and shuls didn't go under, and yeshivas didn't go under. We have to fight for religion outside of the political framework, and perhaps we ought to fight for religion within the framework of the larger political party. In other words, people could say that there are more religious people voting for Likud than there are for Mizrahi. That may be the case. In other words, it may be, like Jews have learned within the Democratic Party, there are Jews who are able to accomplish the Jews within the Democrat and within the Republican Party. Like that may be religious Jews within the Likud and within the Marach will be able to accomplish what we are accomplishing now. Anyway, these are just questions, but I think that that is the situation as I see it, and let us hope that God gives us the wisdom to make the right choices. Thank you.
All right, any questions? We'll take it 2 or 3 questions if you'd like to. Mr. Crumbine, you can hand up first there.
To a certain extent, I would agree with you, but there are still some points that we have to clarify and make sure. You talk about political parties, and then you lump together religious political parties together, including the Zionists and the Haredi, non-Zionists at the end, which I think you should have separated, because I can't see that the elimination of religious political parties, especially Zionist political parties, will achieve what you want to achieve. I always say, God forbid that we should have in this country a majority of either the Likud or the Marach, because once they have a majority and they don't need anybody else, they can pass any kind of legislation that they want without any kind of opposition. Makes no difference. And the importance of having somebody there as an anchor or as a deterrent to these things is something which would favor. And one thing you neglected to say, of course, as far as the working of religion outside of political parties, is that we have one group like that. It's called Young Israel. And we outreach to all parts of the country. And there is no other political party that reaches out to these non-Orthodox groups or non-Orthodox Jews to bring them in to see maybe we're not so bad. I received in my letterbox this morning for city elections, everybody puts in a flyer. I got one from the Rat Shinui. And if you saw it, their whole program was anti-religious. We are for more buses on Shabbos. We are for a nicer stadium. We are for all of the things of Kill Shabbos. That seems their program, Kill Shabbos. But we can beat them with an education system through, would you say, the religion outside of the political party. We're the only ones that can do it. And I think we ought to concentrate on it, that people should understand that this is what we're doing.
First, I welcome the plug to Young Israel. I think it's very well put. Certainly that's the kind of group that I have in mind if we're talking about outside of the political framework. Secondly, municipal elections, I deliberately did not talk about municipal elections because I think that's a different ballgame altogether. And I think the goals that are involved are different, and how that has to be handled, I don't know that it could be handled except through the political process and through political parties. But what kind of parties it's on is another issue. But the point that we started out with, which is that, God forbid, if ever the Likud or the Marach should have a majority by themselves, then they wouldn't need anybody else. They can do what they want. What we have to understand is that it is slowly, whether we like it or not, coming to that. Not that either Likud or Marach are getting a majority, but notice
Shamir was able to make a national unity government. In other words, there seems to be a center forming. A center which, at least on some major issues that confront Israel today, the center of the Marach, of labor, and the center of Likud seem to be coming together. Now, sure, there are fringes on both of the labor that decry this coming together and are upset. There's the fringes on the right that say it's a terrible thing that happened. Shamir is selling out. But that is a fact. And really, what gave Shamir the power to stick his tongue out at all the religious bodies was that I'm going to make a unity with a government with labor, and therefore I really don't need you people. And they came with their tails, behind their legs, came in anyway into the government, even though he didn't need it. So what I'm saying is that's precisely why I don't think we can put all our eggs into this basket, because it's not effective. In other words, the country is slowly coming to the fact that they will have a majority. Between themselves, the centers will have a majority, and they won't need the religious parties. So you'll say, so therefore we're finished? I say no. In other words, my reading is that we got the original status quo not because we stood up and some kind of deterrence or because of our akshonis, and so we got it. I like to believe, maybe I'm wrong, but I hope not. I like to believe that the majority of the people in this country, as they are now, in all the parties, are not really hostile to tradition. In other words, the kind of Yiddishkeit that we stand for, the basic Yiddishkeit that we stand for, Kashrus, Shabbos, Tzedek, they're not opposed to that. And therefore, if we would organize our act a little better, if we, and don't forget this, we can't sharply differentiate between the Haredim and the Mafdal, because we take all of the mud, we get the mud that's being thrown at the Haredim. The Olam still doesn't know to differentiate between the religious Zionists and the Haredim. And every time they make a Chil Hashem, we get it in the neck as well. So what I'm saying is that we might as well begin preparing like organizations like Indians in order to have that the vehicle for carrying the main burden of our program. Yes.
I'd like to make some comments on about 15%, as you later said, who have a lot of religious Jews who go to be put in Iraq. So it's probably much more than 50% that we have.
Oh yeah, in terms of religious Jews, it's much more.
That'd be just one. As far as religious coercion, that I think is, we're doing it wrong, because if there's any religious coercion, it's from the religion itself, from Judaism. God said that we have to do things a certain way, otherwise we'll get punished. Simple. He said every day in the Kriyash.
Yeah, but we don't do the funny.
But the religious coercion comes from that. It doesn't come from the religious party that we say the religion should be that. We say what the religion is. If there's any coercion, it's because Judaism says it.
But not if you have religious legislation. If you have a religious law, let's say that
if they're against Shabbos, Shabbos is in Judaism. If they're against buses on that they should run on Shabbos, it's against the Jewish religion. So the religious coercion comes from the Jewish religion. What you were saying, which I agree with, is that the Jewish religion should be above any political party. Period. That's what we should strive. The other thing that I would like to mention is that all around us, all around Israel, our enemies, the Arab states, they're all governed by Islam. That's the government. Anybody else in those governments are secondary citizens. Over here in this country, both Iraq and Israel are going after the Arab folks. They want democracy. Arafat also wants to make this a democracy. Democracy for us in this particular situation is a very bad thing, because we're just putting in like frozen horses right in and we're promoting them to all our lives. So we have to keep that in mind when we do it. There's another thing. If we want to be equal, that is, if we want peace with the Arab states around us, we have to make sure that Jews are on a parity basis with the Arabs. Right now, Jews in Arab states are dhimmi. I don't think an Arab in the Jewish state should have any more rights in Israel than a Jew has in an Arab state.
All right, thank you very much.
There's one final point you mentioned. You can go home now. One thing thing that you mentioned last about that the important things like the Intifada, the making peace and so on, these are vital things because it's like there's a fire burning, everybody's talking about everything else except putting out the fire. We should have more discussion about that. We want to do about it. We have the brain. There's no reason that if we could win a 6-day war against all these nations, that this has to keep on going for 15 months.
All right, thank you very much, and I would like to take the opportunity to thank you, Rabbi Shubert, for a very stimulating and thought-provoking address, which is, I'm sure will give us many more questions to ask in the future.